Another beautiful lesson in pastime with Srila Prabhupada that I was fortunate enough to be at was on La Cienega Temple in Los Angeles. I remember once that we put a play on for Srila Prabhupada, and it was the drama from Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Lord Chaitanya is floating in the ocean in ecstasy, remembering pastimes of Radha Krishna. And the fisherman touches Lord Chaitanya, and the devotees are running all over because they don't know where Lord Chaitanya is. They can't find him, and they see the fisherman. So they know, of course, that the fisherman must have come in contact with Lord Chaitanya. So this was Vishnujan Swami and Mohanananda. And Vishnujan was running around chanting like a madman because he had touched Lord Chaitanya. And Prabhupada was enjoying it so much. He was laughing and laughing and enjoying it. So Prabhupada was not dry. Prabhupada always saw the ecstasy in Krishna consciousness. On one lecture, Prabhupada said, you cannot advance in Krishna consciousness unless you're joyful. So that's why Prabhupada told us, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. So Krishna consciousness is a joyful process, and Prabhupada always exemplified that. And again, this was an example of Prabhupada encouraging the devotees. It wasn't a professional play. It was the early days. There wasn't a lot of paraphernalia that was professionally made. But Prabhupada enjoyed it so much, and then after, I remember we went out and had a darshan, and again he was saying how nice the plays were, and how nice and how you should do plays like this all the time. Nowadays you don't see so much, the dramas. But Prabhupada so much enjoyed that, and just enjoyed seeing his devotees where he could engage in a reciprocation with them. That's what Prabhupada relished. That was the personal relationship that we all have with Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada, it's like Krishna, they said, Anor Nyan Mahato Mahayan. He's smaller than the smallest, and he's greater than the greatest. So Srila Prabhupada had that aspect as Jagat Guru, greater than the greatest. But yet, he would relate to us on an individual level and reciprocate with us in love. So that's a very beautiful characteristic and quality of Srila Prabhupada. Very, very personal.
One time I remember Prabhupada was, I was first introduced to Prabhupada with some other library party members. Satsvarup Maharaj, our leader, was introducing us one by one. So Prabhupada looked at me when he said my name, and like so many of my godbrothers, I felt like he was looking right through me. And I felt like a little insignificant speck of dust in the universe and completely unworthy of being engaged in his service. So I was feeling that way. And I heard from Shruti Kirti in one of his books about what Prabhupada was really thinking in his perception when he would look at people that way. He was thinking, how can I engage this person in Krishna service? I'm thinking, I'm unworthy to be engaged in Krishna service. He's thinking, how can I engage this person in Krishna service? When I heard that, then some of Prabhupada's gravity became very clear to me, what he was really thinking. And I wish I had known that at that time. I would have felt more enthused instead of what I felt, which was like crawling in a hole somewhere.
We were in Vrindavan and got to clean his quarters every day. And then every day after lunch, Prabhupada would rest. And when he got up at 4 o'clock usually, we'd bring him fresh juice, a fresh garland, and sandalwood pulp. And so I had to make the garland one day. I had to find the flowers. First of all, it's not like it is today. You go to Vrindavan and outside you have 1 million flowers you can purchase. At that time outside there was 0 flowers you could purchase. You had to go all the way in town to the Banki Bihari temple where they had some flowers outside of that temple. And somehow I scrounged up some flowers and made a nice garland with marigolds and roses. And I was less intelligent somehow and put some water in that garland before I put it in the fridge. And when they came and when they put it in Prabhupada, it was apparently wet. And he took it off immediately. And that was a chastisement that went deep into my heart, that he didn't accept my garland that time. And I just realized, you know, we have to like really use our intelligence and the best of everything for the Guru. Otherwise, he might not accept our service. You know? So that was a deep realization.
In 1974 in Mayapur, after the festival time, a series of events unfolded, beginning with the idea that a lot of devotees were sick, and Prabhupada had brought in the leaders into his room, in the front room in the Lotus Building, and you know, it was Jayapataka Maharaj and Tamal Krishna, Narada Muni especially. And so he was explaining how he wasn't satisfied that the devotees were sleeping. He'd been up, I even saw this, that he was up on the upper floors and he saw a lot of people sick and sleeping when they should have been at Parikrama. It was like 8 in the morning, quite late. So at the time, when I was looking through the window, he was talking to them, explaining. They were blaming each other and saying none of them had enough money to get better food. So Prabhupada kind of paused and he said, just before that, this fellow Sudama Vipra, who was a sannyasi at the time, he was a friend of Siddhaswarup's, very good friend, bodyguard, very tough guy. He had gone to the Philippines. Prabhupada praised him for his preaching, but at the same time, he didn't want anyone to come to the Philippines. He'd even threatened them severely, the other GBCs. And Prabhupada knew all this, and I happened to know it. So at the time that Prabhupada came in, Sudama came in, at the same time Chaku was sitting there. He was a Bengali worker, Muslim, but he loved Prabhupada. He loved to sit there and listen to Prabhupada. And during the course of the conversation, Prabhupada saw Sudama Vipra. The others didn't see him come in. He was sitting behind them. And Prabhupada said, so if you require money, Sudama Vipra will supply. And he went with his hand like this, and then they turned around and they saw Sudama Vipra sitting there. Same time, they were kind of shocked that Prabhupada would say that, because the last person in ISKCON who would have given him a dime or a paisa would be Sudama Vipra. And in a split second, Sudama Vipra took off his expensive watch and just handed it to Chaku, and so that Prabhupada could see how munificent he was. And it was just a snippet or something completely amazing to me, that Prabhupada's wit or his intelligence, just so sharp. And whether or not Sudama Vipra understood the message there, that's something we'll never know. But he gave the watch, and at the same time shocked those leaders, and because they knew that there's no way that he would ever give them a dime. He'd rather kill them than give them money, basically. I think he had said pretty much the similar thing. So this is one of the pastimes of Prabhupada's wit, wisdom, vast intelligence.
In January of 1977, Srila Prabhupada allowed me to travel with him as his recording secretary. To this day, when I think of that month that I spent with Srila Prabhupada, I honestly cannot recall seeing Srila Prabhupada sleep. And he was getting ill. We had gone to the Kumbh Mela, it was cold, things weren't set up in a wonderful way in our camp, but I just don't recall Srila Prabhupada sleeping. There was a problem getting to the Kumbh Mela, and the train that we thought had been booked, we were told, was filled. And an official of the railway system of India provided a special royal coach that's reserved for what remains of the princes, the princely class of princes and kings of old India, their family descendants. They only used that for them. He arranged for this royal coach to be hooked up to one of the trains going to Allahabad just for Srila Prabhupada. So it was set up perfectly. It had a kitchen, It had a room for Prabhupada's transcriber, and of course, Prabhupada's servant. I was there, and Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada and I shared the sleeping compartment. So at the end of the day, when we were supposed to retire, we would both go to that room. But I think I was the only one who would be falling asleep. And the reason I know that is I remember we were having the most intense conversation about how, because of our movement, the Indian government has gotten so bold to finally stand up to communism. And because of our movement, India has now outlawed cow killing. And eventually I faded and must have fallen asleep. But I remember waking up bright-eyed around 12 midnight, so maybe I slept for a few hours, and Prabhupada, perfectly dressed with fresh tilak, unwrinkled dhoti, was just sitting on the other bed, in the opposite mine, just sitting there, waiting for me to wake up so we could continue the conversation, which we did. When you traveled with Prabhupada, you were on Prabhupada time. You were on Prabhupada's schedule. And his transcendental spiritual energy carried his servants and his secretaries. And if it meant not sleeping, you didn't even feel it.
On our return trip, we stopped, I think it was in Surat, and this encounter, this was documented, and there's a lot of nice film of that. And then we'd gone to Indore, but in the train there was a mix-up, and they were not able to get Srila Prabhupada a first-class ticket, and so he rode with us in third class. So third class is, you can't even imagine that, how inconvenient it is. But I was in charge of the food. I had a bunch of, savories and things such as that, and I had been carrying them with me on the journey. And then Srila Prabhupada asked me, says, "I'm hungry, please feed me." So I gave him some samosa and some kachoris, and he began eating them. And then he pointed to the other devotees and said, "Please feed everybody, give these devotees." So I gave everyone their remnants or their prasadam. And then he looked at me and says, "Now you eat." So I began eating, and then he said, "Give me another kachori." And so I'm thinking that my right hand is dirty, and what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And in the third class cars, every third car, they had a little tiny water fountain in the sink. And so in order for me to get there and wash my hand and run back, it would take a long amount of time. So I kept looking down the aisleway like this. And Srila Prabhupada, he knew what I was thinking, because he says, "You may use your left hand." He said, "Sometimes the left hand is okay." So just for me, there were many instances where he knew what I was thinking, and he responded in kind. So one other example of this is, this was in Mayapur, and this was, I think, in 1974, when they had one of the first big, Mayapur festivals where devotees from other countries had come. And we were on a morning walk. There was a limited number of us walking with Srila Prabhupada along the Ganga. And as we were walking, in the bushes on the side, there were people who were doing their morning duties, and the smells were wafting up. And there was a pansiwala, that's the boatman, plying his boat along the edge of the river back and forth. And Srila Prabhupada was looking at that, and then he began to tell us the stories of Gopal Ban, between him and Krishnagar, and how, passing stool and this and that. And when Srila Prabhupada began to tell these stories, this was the first time that I'd ever heard him, in any respect at all, have some type of mundane conversation, you know. And he was telling us these stories of, you know, and I'm thinking, where's the spiritual input into this? And I was very confused. And then he said, the spiritual significance is very subtle, you know. So he knew what I was thinking, you know. So.
Well, our traveling party, I was on a girls' book distributing party in the summer of '76, and we were following Srila Prabhupada around to a lot of different temples. And one of the things we got to do was go to the New York Rath Yatra, where Srila Prabhupada was. It was his first Rath Yatra that he came to. And at the end, when we were at the end of the parade, Kirtananda was whisking him away, you know, and nobody saw it. And I saw it with another girl, so I kind of nudged her and I said, Prabhu, look, there goes Prabhupada. Oh my gosh, he's all alone with Kirtananda. So we went running over to the limo. And we got right next to the limo, and the kirtan party was coming, and we were chanting and dancing right next to Prabhupada, Haribo, Haribo. And Prabhupada kind of made a motion with his garland, like he was going to take one off. And I said, oh, Jai, Srila Prabhupada, I'll take your garland. And he ended up smiling at me real big. He had a big twinkle in his eye. And he ended up taking his garland off. And he leaned over Kirtananda, and he handed it to me out of the window. And it was just in time because all the senior men were going to be there in like 2 seconds, and I knew I'd get knocked out of the way. So to make this story, a little of the background knowledge for it was that the summer before that Rath Yatra, I was in a really bad car accident with 3 other Sankirtan girls. And by the side of the car, my head was off. I mean, I had sustained really massive injuries. None of us really should have lived through it. We ended up in intensive care a long time. So to maintain any spiritual consciousness, and I wasn't initiated yet, and I was trying to chant, but it was almost physically impossible. I went through all the fields and meadows of New Vrindavan, picking all the wildflowers that I used to pick for Prabhupada to make his garlands when I was back at New Vrindavan. So it really made it meaningful to me that when he handed me his garland, he knew what I was trying to remember at the time of death, what I thought was going to be the time of death, and I was only 20-something years old then. So it was very meaningful to me that Prabhupada had made, because as soon as I started doing that, I became very calm, even though everybody around me was telling me I was dead. So it was very meaningful when Prabhupada handed me his garland with a twinkle in his eye. I just felt like he knew. The third part of the story, which was really significant to me, is later on, 6 months later, I was out for the Christmas marathon, and I just happened to call home. I went talking to a couple of college friends. I called a friend of mine who is now an airline stewardess, and she said, oh, I had that guru of yours on a flight. She was a cross-country stewardess. And she said, I asked him about you, and I was like, oh my gosh, Vicky, what did you do? And she told me she knew he was a special person to me. So when she had him on a flight, she kept going up to him, asking him if he needed water, if he needed 7-Up. It got to be the end of the flight, and she couldn't hold back anymore. And she said, you know, I have a good friend of mine, and she's at that farm of yours in West Virginia, and she's just been in a horrible car accident, and we want to know, I'd like to know if she's all right. Are they taking care of her? And she thought maybe he wasn't going to answer. He just looked out the window for a minute. And then he turned around and said to her, I am aware of it. Krishna is aware of it. And she will be fine. And I was just like, oh, Vicky, you're such an airhead. This happened 6 months ago and you didn't tell me. Prabhupada knows who I am. Krishna knows who I am. I was just like dancing in the airport by now, you know. I was just like so ecstatic, you know, to hear that story. So it just kind of confirmed what I thought.
Right away, the devotees had realized that we don't have a Vyasa for Prabhupada. And Bahudak immediately, he knew I had some carpentry experience, so he immediately surrendered me to Dhanavir Prabhu, who was the temple president there, and said, Dharmatma, well, I wasn't Dharmatma then, I wasn't even initiated. Maybe I was, but he said, he'll do it, you know. So then the first question was, what's the Vyasa, you know? because none of us had seen one. There wasn't one in Portland, and there wasn't one in Vancouver. But luckily, someone produced a picture of I believe the LA one. So I had something to go on. But the catch was Prabhupada was going to be there in 2 days. So anyway, I started busying myself, and I was in a foreign city, so I didn't know what to do. It's not like, there was Home Depots and Lowe's on every corner. So I finally got all the materials together, and I basically worked day and night until it got to the day that Prabhupada was arriving. So, and at that time, when Prabhupada was coming, all the devotees, they all left for the airport, and here myself and maybe 2 other devotees were left there. And I was feeling a little bit left out, and I was feeling, well, why, why? Of course, I was naive and young. I didn't understand that I'm getting the opportunity to make this Vyasa for the Jagat Guru, of the universe. And so I finished it. I was getting close to finishing it, and all of a sudden the devotees started yelling, "He's coming, he's coming. Hurry!" And there's, devotees are scattering around, and then cars pulling up, and devotees running into the temple room, and it became crazy. And here I was in my dirty dhoti, and I was so frantic. I'm trying to get my tools off the Vyasa, and finally I got it done, and I'm looking at it. Okay, it's all right. No tools or screwdrivers or anything sitting there. And then Prabhupada walks in. So then he offered dandavats to the deities, and then he got up and he looked around. He was smiling at the devotees, and then he started his walk back to the Vyasa. And he's walking, and then all of a sudden I got this cold chill down my back, and I began panicking. And the reason was that I had remembered that I forgot to secure the back of the Vyasa. I had just tacked in a couple of nails just to hold it, and I was going to put the bolts in later. But with the frantic pace, I forgot to do it. So I just, it was the most horrific feeling. I was just terrified that Prabhupada, I was thinking, all these things went through my mind. He's going to lean back and the whole thing's going to fall down. And anyway, he came and he did something really amazing. And I probably was the only one to see it, or maybe it didn't happen. It was one of those things where he walked to the Vyasa. Instead of going up to the front, he kind of walked to the side and he looked at the back like this. And then he turned around, and then he came, and he had that same smile on his face, and then he walked to the front, and he walked up the 2 steps that I made, and he walks on, and he sits on the Vyasa. And I don't remember what the context of his class was, because the whole time I was just I was sweating, and I was totally freaking out. But as it was, he finished the lecture, and the devotees were ecstatic, and I was so relieved because Prabhupada never leaned back once. He sat the whole time and gave the class. He got down and he gave pranams to all the devotees and he left. So I was thinking that how fortunate I was that I had that service. And Krishna had actually, I felt that Krishna had saved me because Prabhupada never leaned back. So I learned the lesson that any service I did for Srila Prabhupada, I should try to do it to the best of my ability. That was a lesson that I learned from that I was doing it in haste, but I should always be thinking, that I have to do this the best of my ability for Srila Prabhupada. And that's pretty much what I learned from that incident.
And he was giving a lecture from the Srimad Bhagavatam in the morning about King Indra, that King Indra had impersonated himself as one of the great sages and had some sex with the sage's wife. And he was cursed by the sage to have vaginas on his body, but these vaginas were turned into eyes. So it's a little bit, embarrassing to hear him mention the word vagina. But at a certain point in the story, he just looked up and he said, "So, you can either love Krishna or love vagina," just like that. And I remember I turned completely red. But as I've been meditating on that more and more throughout my life, I realized that that is actually absolute, at least within material nature, that you can either love Krishna or love vagina. It may be a little hard to take to hear this story, but that's the instruction.
So in Atlanta in 1975, we were on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada, I and my mates on the library party. And one of them asked, Prabhupada, we sometimes go to anthropology departments, and they ask, if the Vedic culture is so ancient, where are the bones? Why are there no remnants from that day and age? And Prabhupada said, because they burn the bodies. That's civilized. And then he stopped for a moment and said, "These anthropologists, just like dogs, digging for bones."
I guess what really amazes me about Prabhupada, because I so much relish everything he does. I mean, that he was expert in everything. He was an expert cook. And he could cook. He cooked a feast on Bhaktisiddhanta's appearance day in an hour and a half, a 10-course feast. He had about 4 or 5 devotees helping him. But by the time he had finished cooking the feast in an hour and a half, the whole kitchen was clean. The pots were dirty. His kirtans are just, they're like incredible. They're like right out of the spiritual world. And they're totally musically, perfect. And the way his writing, everything that he did, he was so expert, and he was the best at it. The best cook, the best kirtaneer, the best speaker, the best writer, everything he did. He did it amazingly. Yeah.
The qualities that stand out most, or that stood out to me most about Srila Prabhupada was that he wanted to flood the world with Krishna consciousness, and that he had unlimited knowledge, and that he gave you a lot of confidence. He gave you confidence in him because he was so completely sure and certain, and he had so much faith that this was absolute knowledge, and that he had that air, that pride, that this is the ultimate. If you follow me, you'll be okay.
Karuna Prachu